Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning. I am Alessandra Marcossi. I am from from the Society of the Cares that promoted this initiative with the work of many months. I speak Italian, and I would like to welcome everyone. And after, I will have some interventions in the beginning to talk generally about the reasons of this seminar, where
Recording in progress.
really thank you all for the cooperation, collaboration, and for the accomplishment of these meetings, to have these international meetings, really to have the solitude that pandemic of COVID-19 spread out. Before the meeting of Rome, where you're going to have the demonstrations and the COP26 for the climate, we had these demonstrations of Friday for future, and you're going to have these with Climate 28. So we are going to have some announcements and denouncements about these meetings where they have this criticism and struggle on behalf of the women. Our first words are these, the patriarchal war against women, destructive when you have the importation of democracy, the war that enrich the industry of weapon and the military power, that have civil wars and go through migration, and you have the lack of cares in relation to the nature and humankind. And actually, after these introductions, I have Zaga's correct words that will be soon with us, and was constrained and had to run away from Afghanistan after the disaster, after 20 years of occupation and corruption, and the withdrawal of the United States led the Taliban against the population. And, you know, the situation everybody knew about, the hypocrisy of the politicians and the media that cooperated with these corruptions. Now they are crying by the lack of the women and children. We pacifists, we are against Afghanistan and then Iraq war, we are against, and we are against these colonial wars that really are in Middle East and in Africa. The pandemic made us even more unprepared, and we are now losing lives, human lives, and the social inequality and gender inequality are growing, and you have the rich and the poor countries, and they are there because of the power of multinationals, because of the license of vaccinations and the vaccines. The pandemic is not an emergency that it was not foreseen. It's because of the lack of human care, because of capitalism, because of these liberal policies, and with the privatizations and the cuts in the education and health affairs. It's uncaring regarding the nature, regarding human lives and biodiversity. The effects are even worse when you have women where you have more violence, domestic violence, I would say. We have a lack of workforce and workplaces, and you have the domestic work, that you have a double work for women. Let's see the Latin America where you have violence and against the ones that defended the communities and territories. They have more diseases due to the environmental crisis. And taking all of these into considerations based on the situation of expulsions, you have explorations instead of taking care of women. You have a traffic of human beings and unfair laws about migrations where you criminalize the poverty. The climate conditions make women even more vulnerable. So it is essential, this work of feminist work in relation to the environment. So it's very important to save the planet, to save the humanity. Humankind is at risk, especially the poor women that are at risk of discriminations and have more power, weight and burden because of the climate change. So the climate change, you should plant trees, recycle waste, solid wastes. So we have to take care of the reproduction of people, the nature, and the planet. The crisis of the caring and sharing make our society at risk. The intelligence of women are not in the place of having the more better and more decision making. So we have to have a more sanitary assistance. We have problems with the military affairs. You have to have dignity in terms of incomes. The weapons are not to really make us safer. It's not there to make the planet safer in terms of climate changing and global warming. They are responsible for that, I would say. And, you know, the national and militarized conflicts are there. And we have the political mistakes at light. And, you know, you have a militarized security and you have a collective health at risk. So, and people are not being well taken care. So welcome to the treaty to have a nuclear weapon prohibition, and Italy has more than 40 nuclear power, should rectify this agreement to be against it. And you have International Peace Research Institute, and you have the global affairs in terms of financial input. It's increasing when you compare with 2019. So United States, Russia, they have more than 20% of the military investments in power, military power. And the GDP, we have a reduction of 4.4% in health affairs because of pandemic. So the military investments in terms of the net GDP have 2.4% when you had 2.2 in 2019. So year by year, this is quite substantial. So you have the global crisis in 2009 when you compare that. And in COP5, Italy, if you compare with the COP5, Italy, you have United Kingdom and then France. So you have a struggle area in place. So there is no healing without a conflict. If you want to change a system that is patriarchal system of economical, social, political, cultural power, they are all based on inequality. So you have violence, discrimination, homophobia, violence against women, the feminist side. So the revolution is the respect and taking care of the freedom and the rights for all. Native people, migrant people, we all need and deserve citizenship. And we are going to make it. Thank you very much. And in this moment, I would like to have Azat Lekbre, it's a comrade Afghan comrade that had to run away from her country. It's soon.
So the war was already going on for 10 years when my mother Qamar Safai gave birth to a child girl, and it was the time when the Mujahideen alliance were fighting with Russians. I was born in war, and I was refugee in a strange country where I was trying to understand my own circumstances. I was crying together with my sister between my classes. It was the time that I was trying to understand my circumstances in a strange country. Living a life of a child in war. My name is Zarlash Barek. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak today. When I was making the sense of the world as an undocumented refugee between 1996 to 2001, it was the time that when my country was ruled by Taliban. They already won the war. And that was the time that the women of my country has already lost everything, their rights and their power. They were forced to wear burqa. They were killed publicly. And they were stoned in football stadiums. Unaware of all these atrocities, I was trying to manage my 3 years of schooling in order to provide save money and provide education for my little sisters. Meantime, when it was end of 2001, okay, so they are doing the translation. Okay.
No, the translation is simultaneo. Sì, sì. No, devono passare.
Okay, so I should wait for the translation, or I can continue?
You can go because it's simultaneous translation, but she has to lower your.
Okay. So that's fine. You can tell me.
Okay, go.
Okay. It was end of 2001 when the government of Taliban was collapsed. And it was a fresh starting for everyone. We were allowed to go back to our own country, to the beautiful land, and start everything from the beginning. There was a type of optimism in the air. Women were allowed to go to school. They had the choice to wear burqa or not. And they were allowed to host the culture programs and wear traditional clothes and appear in public. There was a type of progress and development for women. So people were allowed to choose their own career and profession. As a teenager who I was returned to my country, I was dreaming for my own career and education. I continued my education. It was about that I should get a job. And dreaming about my career and was so much excited about life. I remember very well, it was a festival of Eid, a festival of joy and prayer. I went for shopping. And the day after I was about to go to university, that my father stopped me and he was asking about my yesterday shopping sale. And meanwhile, I was getting late to go to university. And in this moment, I heard a splitting bomb blast. There was 2 bomb blasts on that day. The bodies were blasted and the pieces were all around. The blast was on bus of National Army officers. I knew lots of people who lose their loved ones. Through that night, I was just hearing screaming of families and women for their loved ones. And that was for 19 years me, when the night of festival changed to a night of horror. We as an Afghan has always had long-lasting security problems. We always dreamed for a normal life like any other citizens, to go to school, to go to offices, celebrate the festivals, play with our children. But always we ended up with unexpected results, with bomb blast, with rocket, with war. Let me share one of my other experience. It was a nice working day. Me and my sister were working with our favorite organization. And we were happy. All of a sudden, the building shaking so heavily as it is a very huge earthquake. And I was thinking, maybe it's earthquake. I look at the window and the dust was circling. And then a huge bomb blast. Everything turned dark. For a few seconds, I did not understand anything. And after a few seconds, there were security alarms, security messages, and security measurements. I was stuck in my place. My mind was not working. Meanwhile, I got the news that the bomb blast was inside my sister's office. I didn't understand what to do. I just wanted to go and see if she's alive or not. But I was not allowed. And finally, we managed to call her. She was in extreme shock, and she was saying just one word, Zalash, everybody is dead. It was the bomb blast of 31st May 2017 in front of Germany. In this mortar bomb, more than 300 people were injured and 150 were dead. Last time with Taliban was in my country, I was a child. I do not have much more memories. But this time I have came as an adult with lots of memory. I have left everything behind, my home, my career, my homeland, and my people. I still have nightmares and wake up at the middle of night and sleep heavily. Those, those, in, those incidents from leaving our home, going to airport, and coming to Italy are all like a movie in front of my eyes. I still remember the night that we were told to leave home at 2 a.m. and go to airport. I still fear that fear in my heart when I was wearing hijab and going toward the airport and was praying to be not stopped by Taliban. The screaming of my sister was still in my ear when we were in the gate of airport and there was firing of Taliban and we were screaming our brother-in-law to not drive forward and stop. And that image of the airport which turned to a refugee camp. And people were sleeping for nights there to get an opportunity and go out of the country. But unfortunately, these unfortunes are not just from takeover, but it was from before and beginning. My country has been always considered as a bad place for women. I belong to a country where women have been always victim of tradition. Their rights has been abused and their life have been threatened. You have read lots of reports, documentaries, and news about abuse of human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan. I belong to a country where there is tiny opportunities for women, but millions of burglaries. They are given with the very limited rights. Even now, education is not a right for them, but a crime. I have lost my everything to war twice in my 30 years. And I have started everything from the beginning and again. But still, I feel the luckiest among those 15 million Afghan women. Because I have the chance to tell my story to you. I have the opportunity to share my insignificant story. But what about those 15 million women inside Afghanistan that now they are the property of Taliban? They are living nightmare after nightmare behind the house. What about their stories? What about their existence? Is the war the only destiny for them? If we look at If we look at the history, World War I lasted for 4 years. Two lasted for 6 years. And there are war that has been eventually stopped. But what about war in Afghanistan? War for Afghan women. It's a war for entire life. Girls and women in other countries grow up listening to happy stories forever and forever. But we as an Afghan are having the nightmare forever and forever. And I hope that it ends one day. Thank you for listening.
Grazie mille a Zarlesh Berek. Adesso darò la parola.
Thank you very much. Now I will have the words to the first session for the moderation of the first session to my colleague and Nora Rodrigues.
Una delle moderatrici, parlerò italiano.
Thank you, Alessandra. I am one of the moderator. You speak in Italian. I am a feminist activist and I am from the Fem group of the Society Group. In the first session, we are going to discuss about the lack of liberal care that you had, this individualism, precarizations in work and life. And let's see how these different countries are reacting towards pandemic and that they are really be under pressure of the multinational desires, and you have the patents of the vaccines, so the world population cannot be vaccinated massively. So we have the pandemic that could really show to us. So you have the human beings and environments and the importance of taking care of the world and domestic situation. So now I will have each of you.
Parlano e cominciamo su un'altra cosa, avete a disposizione 10 minuti e sarò io a ricordarvi quando state finendo il tempo, perché abbiamo bisogno di rispettare molto seriamente i tempi a disposizione. Quindi do subito la parola a Nandita Shah, che viene dall'India ed è co-direttrice di Askara, Women's Resource Center.
She's going to speak, and it is one of the great NGOs in Mumbai. And its aim is the emancipation of women. It is one of the organizations that worked at the Social World Forum in Mumbai in 2004. Now with the word, Nandita Shah.
I'm Nandita, and I'm so happy to be part of this gathering of so many feminists together. Thank you for inviting us. Already said that I'm part of Akshara Center, and along with the World Social Forum, we were also organizers for the feminist dialogues that happen nationally and internationally, and also part of the civil society advisory group of UN Women. Can I request for my presentation to be uploaded? Maria? Maria, can my presentation be uploaded?
Yes, Nandita, continue.
Can you get my presentation? Okay. I wanted my presentation up. Shall I do it?
Chi deve pubblicare la presentazione? Ah, ecco.
Arriva?
Ok. Dovrebbe arrivare, Nandita.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, what we are trying to do in Akshara is to work to change the consciousness of youth in India on looking at gender equality issues. We're trying to empower the disadvantaged and socially, marginalized sections of society to how can they break their cycle of poverty, and by enhancing their capacity through different interventions. And we also feel very strongly that we need to, can you go to the next one, please? Can you go to the next slide? We feel very strongly that we need to engage men in this process when we are talking about gender equality. We need to have the entire spectrum of intersections of different genders join in this movement together to bring about change. Next. Next, please. So while we are talking about individual change, we feel that we need to change the gender norms in our society. We need to challenge the gender narrative that is there. So individual change is not enough. We need a larger societal change that needs to happen together with it. Next. Next, please. Next slide. And our effort is also has been constantly to see how we can change the state institution to be also responsive. So our constant effort has been to bring in the aspect of collaboration with state as well as confrontation with state to make sure that they become gender responsive by creating, improving emergency responses, by introducing a police helpline, or, how do we increase the bus conductors' role in preventing sexual harassment, as well as including gender within the planning process. Next slide, please. So while we are doing all these different kinds of programs, it was impossible not to respond to COVID-19 lockdown. And we had to come up with multiple interventions that had to respond to COVID-19. Next slide, please. You have the major kind of, next slide. You have the major kind of visuals. So this boy is being dragged by the mother on a suitcase, and this became a symbol of what's happening to migrants across during the time when the lockdown was announced. We had only 4 hours before the lockdown was announced, so we were not prepared at all. The whole country was just taken by shock, and almost 10.4 million migrants migrated from internal migration happened, and people were walking. There were no vehicles, there was nothing that was available. And today India talks about we have reached 1 billion vaccination, but again the lockdown has taken toll in a very different way on lives of people. And what happened, the irony of stay home, stay safe became the biggest challenge in the lives of women. Um, Women usually are told that streets are not safe. And as we know that when you come home, homes are not safe. But during the pandemic, it became abundantly clear that this was a reality most of the women were facing. So they lost their jobs. They were the first one to be fired. Women were confined to small homes with all the family members at home, demanding a lot more of care work and household work with less money. So the whole burden of running the household came on to the shoulders of women. We had, a lot of families had cut in consumption, food consumption. And in India, the tradition is that you serve the husband and sons first, and the women and daughters eat after that. So that became even the food consumption. So you just got the leftover of whatever was there. So women's own health also were issue, and mental health. And what we found is that there was an increase 2.5 times on domestic violence complaints that was done by the National Commission of Women. So this was the reality in which we had to respond. Next slide, please. Oh, you've gone faster. No, the one before that. So our first reaction was to come up with relief, and we did a lot of areas of relief, going into different areas of reaching out to women with cash transfers, with food, with sanitary napkins. So that was the first response that we did. But what was the biggest thing that we really responded to, and we felt it was very important because nobody was doing it outside of women's organization, was to really talk about domestic violence. And that was what we took up as a big campaign. We took up the campaign of we engaged with almost 26 celebrities, both from our film industry, from cricket, anybody who was very, very well known. We invited them to take a stand on domestic violence. And this is the first time in the history of the country that any of these people have taken a stand on domestic violence. So it was a huge campaign that we did, and even the government came in to support the campaign and to talk about domestic violence. So we were able to get the state to take a stand on domestic violence. And the first demand that we made was you declare this as an emergency essential service. In some states it worked, in some states we were not successful, but this was a very important demand because unless it's essential service, you were not able to respond to many cases of domestic violence. Can we go to the next one? We even did another campaign with MTV where we spoke about, don't cover up, don't put makeup on your violence. So we used the very famous challenge that TikTok and all these platforms use to brush and change your face. We did it in another way where you were dressed up and you removed the makeup to show what's behind that. And we really raised the whole issue of don't cover up. But what was important for us was that, if women had to get help, can I go to the next slide, please? If women were to get help for domestic violence, there was no way in which they were able to go. Can we go to the next slide? They were not able to use the services of the people whose service providers, because all numbers were landline numbers. So a huge task was to get the personal mobile numbers of service provider. We were able to get almost 450 service provider in the state where we are part of, to say that let's put this in a directory, let's put this out so that women know whom to contact if they have a problem in their own district, in their own villages, in their own areas. And we even created a web app so that women could access it in local languages easily so that they can go to the right person for help. the next big challenge, can you go to the next slide? The next big challenge that we were faced with is that most of the people who gave us their mobile numbers were not comfortable with doing any kind of online counseling. So we had to take up the big challenge of training all these service providers on how to do phone counseling, how to intervene if the abuser picks up the phone, how can you protect the woman in those circumstances, how can we intervene and provide help. So that was a huge kind of role that we had to play. Next, please. And so we were forced to come up with multiple interventions on how do we respond to domestic violence. And this, we did it in one state, but there were many organizations. Can we go to the next slide? Many organizations who did this in multiple states. And this is a report that, can you go to the next slide, please? We tried to bring together a report of what has happened nationally by multiple organizations, what kind of challenges that we are faced with, and what is the demand that we have. So we have a platform of almost 130 women's organizations that put out a kind of white paper and demanded many suggestions from the government, many interventions from the government. And that is what we are still now focusing on and trying to reach to a larger group of government officials to make sure that we get all the demands that we have put forward. So I'm just concentrating on one of the big initiatives around domestic violence, which has reached all over India from many, many organizations, many feminist organizations in India. Thank you very much for inviting me and also for providing a platform like this for all of us to have exchanges. Thank you.
Grazie, grazie Nandita. Grazie Nandita anche per aver rispettato i tempi e per averci raccontato il grande lavoro che avete fatto là in India, per cui grazie davvero. Ora la parola a Meriem Zaghidi Adda. Meriem Zaghidi Adda viene dalla Tunisia, è una militante femminista e operatrice culturale, è stata assistente presso il servizio di azione culturale dell'Istituto francese di Tunisia, coordinatrice del centro d'ascolto per le donne vittime di violenza dell'Association Peace, è laureata in Belle Arti all'Istituto Superiore di Belle Arti di Tunisi. Do la parola a Meriem, chiedo a Meriem
in Fine Arts. Now,
ricordo che ha
Meredith is going to speak. You have to say in which language you're going to talk about. You have 10 minutes. Thank you, Mary.
Non so se... Buongiorno. Non mi vedo.
Morning.
Ah, ok.
I cannot see.
Buongiorno a tutte.
Okay, good morning.
Sono molto felice di partecipare con lei tutte a questo seminario perché la solidarietà tra le donne è per me molto importante.
All of you in this seminar because solidarity among women.
Ho praticato da molti anni, parlerò in francese. Il mio nome è Meriem Zaghidi. Alors, tout le monde le sait, la Tunisie a toujours été à l'avant-garde quant aux droits des femmes et en termes d'égalité. Le Code du statut personnel a permis dès 1956 l'abolition de la polygamie. Les femmes tunisiennes ont bénéficié du droit et de la liberté d'avorter dès 1973, soit 2 années avant la France. La liberté du choix de l'époux a également été instaurée dès 1956. Le féminisme d'État, porté par le premier président tunisien, Habib Bourguiba, a rendu l'école obligatoire aux filles dès l'avènement de l'indépendance en 1956. Néanmoins, les inégalités sont encore là.
State feminism was in Asia applied the education of women. Inequality still
pavé pour leurs droits.
exists politically and economically. Women are fighting against the rise of integralists in the government. We have a period, political period,
Sont votés en
in the instauration of a civic state.
Ou désignés. Et puis,
Since
surtout,
2014,
pour la Tunisie, depuis le mois de juillet 2017, une loi cadre contre les violences faites aux femmes.
July 2017, there was a law against
honteux continue à sévir sur la communauté LGBT en criminalisant l'homosexualité, allant les limites de toutes les avancées très rapidement ressenties. Malheureusement, aucune étude pour sur toute cette période de pandémie mondiale, mais les associations féminines et féministes
even the feminist and feminine organizations did not stop acting. They are still very much present.
Les personnels de la santé, très largement
These
féministes.
associations exist, and we have people are working with health, and people are very feminized in Tunisia. However, they do not have a specific accompaniment, and sometimes they don't have the minimum of protection.
Des femmes, comme partout
and sometimes they cannot guarantee the security of their family. The domestic violence has exploded, has risen a lot in this period. Women had to close up against their enemies in this period. The accompaniment during the confinement, during lockdown, which was imposed by the government, whether it's a state accompaniment in this law against this violence against women, the organization had to struggle because the access to these organizations became very difficult. And the access to women was very hard. The stigmatization and institutionalization of violence against women. Civil society was opposed to this measure. However, we've had a text that came after the lockdown to begin the progressive removal of lockdown so that everybody could go back to work. And they forbid women.
Ayant à charge des enfants de moins de 15 ans.
We forbade women that had children to get out of their houses. So it was very clear from the point of view of the authorities that they considered children and care with children
aux mamans, aux femmes, et que les femmes, en fait,
were always exclusively responsibility of women, and women did not have any rights to have professional aspirations and participate of professional life. This is not recognized. This participation is not recognized. And the reality is that the women are the ones that are present in all sectors, especially in the most poor, the poorest areas. And women didn't have any more salaries to face this problem. And COVID left many problems behind. We saw in the last, we've seen in the last 6 months, women killed in front of their kids. The law was applied, however, the silence facing these violences against women was not a priority. And the limit of application of these laws against violence was not discussed. It was not discussed in the public sectors. In a Tunisian journalist, for example, was persecuted by an agent and suffered violence. And she was a victim of violences, police violence, because she did not respect the measures that were imposed during the pandemics. She was 15 minutes more on the street outside her home during the lockdown. The police is always the same problem. It's always the same problem. The police is always in a position as a victim against women. The president of the association, I'm sorry, you have to stop because there is no translation in Italian.
Technical
I don't know
issues.
how we can manage. What we have to do?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Everything is okay.
Non è un problema, aspetto.
Okay. Alors, Myriam, vas-y, merci.
Est-ce que je reprends ou est-ce que...
Va.
Riprendo
vas-y en français.
Continuo?
Oui, tu
Je
peux.
continue?
Can I continue? Yes. I'm going to continue in French.
Myriam, tu
Devo
peux aller.
riprendere? Devo riprendere?
No, tu vas parler en français.
You're going to speak in French.
Ma devo riprendere o continuare?
Non ho capito.
Je dois reprendre depuis le début ou je dois continuer?
Non, pas.
Should I continue or should I go from the beginning?
Je dois continuer ou je dois reprendre depuis le début?
Non, pas au début. Tu peux continuer.
D'accord. Je suis à la fin de toute façon.
Non, pas au début. OK.
D'accord. You can continue. You don't need to go back.
Donc je disais que Alwa Baraket, une journaliste tunisienne, est en ce moment.
I was telling Kate, a Tunisian journalist, she's being persecuted by violence now. The president of the Green organization, she has suffered violence from the police in Tunisia. So they are the most vulnerable and stigmatized women from the LGBTQ plus community. The police acts with a lot of violence. And we are politically unstable in a world context. We have quite a savage liberalism that it increases economical instability, and there is a reduction on their rights, political and sexual rights. Thank you very much, everyone.
Grazie a te per questa
illustrazione Thank you, Mary, for this explanation of Tunisian context, which is very complicated in the world context. Now I'm going to give the word to Jaji. I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name. She's defensor of human rights, and she's part of the feminist society and the feminist movement that promotes the LGBTQ rights, and she acts to promote gender equality in Argelia. Now, Mary, please tell us in which language you're going to speak, and you're going to have 10 minutes.
Je suis d'Algérie, je suis militante féministe et membre.
Thank you very much. I hope you're listening. I am part of the feminist journal in Argelia.
Sí, sí se escucha.
I'm sorry. I don't understand Italian. I was saying that I was a member of the feminist journal, Algerine, with feminist initiatives by women. Regarding the women's rights in Algeria, I'm going to give you a context, the context of COVID, the rights of women. It began in the 1980s. It's been a long time. Women started to be organized in relation to their rights. After the independence, particularly, what was very important happened after 1994 with the application of the Family Code and personal aspects that talked about violence that existed against women in Algeria. And this is a continuous debate. There were some advances. However, now there is a struggle for work, for collective work rights. After all of these struggles, women began after 1984, they talked about the violence against women. And after 2000, there were some advances. And the demand of the code was not so broad. Of course, when I'm talking about harassment and also the penal code, in 2009 was a particular year in relation to defense of women's rights, and there were many popular movements that were very important, and it inspired a better help and more democratic help. And women were organized to demand a fundamental care in Algeria. It was important in the public space and in the media. And after with COVID in this context, the first lockdown, we had some problems there. And in 2020, there were many protests, important protests, not only regarding women's rights, because some women there was a general demand without the need to change. And there were many organizations that requested these rights. In the 90s, there were not so many protests, important protests, such as in 2000, the years 2000.
Des alarmes tirées par la plupart des camarades féministes, c'était concerné les violences faites aux femmes et comment les prendre en charge dans une situation assez particulière. Donc, des lois assez difficiles à appliquer, qui met les femmes dans une situation, une certaine situation d'infériorité et de dépendance, sachant que plus de 80% des violences se passent en intra.
So you had 80%. It is in the family context. There is a home that really does not exist, a lodging, and the government does not exist. So they cannot have this respect in relation to the COVID-19. So the COVID-19 really reduced our rights. Actually, it's been cut in relation of home, housing, sheltering. So the majority of the Algerian women, I would say 4 million of women approximately, they are isolated, they don't have housings. They didn't have condition, family support. They were the ones that had the burden on their backs. And another thing that it was very complicated is one of the self-defense against violence was to have the financial autonomy that it was completely broken because of COVID. So in Algeria, we have advancements so of women, professional careers, a formal marketplace, but you have discrimination there, discrimination. So the mass of workers, you have only 18%. The majority of women that work in the informal work. It's a sector of a lot of exploration and no right. And they cannot go to justice because it's quite complicated. They didn't have this sensation of existing rights in the work. So we have the issue of salary, the context of COVID, that they had less and less autonomy. And these people were not able to bring something in their favor. And this was a work that they could have some gain. And now the majority of the families, there is a violence because there is a country where you have 44 million of inhabitants. And there are associations, but the associations are not able to help them actually. We can say that in this network, SUG, we didn't have that amount of networks that could help us. Even with all these demonstrations, claims of women, there was just one association that could have a housing for women, that could have a sheltering for women, but very limited, I would say.
Ok.
Pode falar pouco mais devagar, pedir. They asked to speak slowly.
Il y a beaucoup de micros qui sont désactivés.
Dovete chiudere i microfoni.
Please mute your mics. Thank you.
proposer ou réfléchir des mesures réelles pour prendre en charge les femmes.
In the confinement, we can think how the women we had a declaration of work in the professional environment.
Your microphone is mute. Please open.
Amel?
Allô?
Ça va?
Est-ce que ça marche? Oui, ça va. Je pensais que ça s'était coupé.
Parce que tu as un compte.
Okay. So we had a mobilization to create an open letter with concrete prepositions to go against the violence. You have the strategy against violence, and in the context where the country is so far, the process, the revolutionary process is this open letter was not taken into account. There was no response for struggling back, fighting back, and do what's necessary to be done.
Féminisées en Algérie, donc elles sont dans le médical.
Not in particular for women.
Elles sont dans les métiers les moins
They are in positions less privileged.
E hai finito?
Frozen.
Hai finito anche il tempo e si è bloccato.
It seems she's off, isn't she?
Amel, excusez-moi.
Well, sorry, you cannot hear you. I think you are blocked. You are muted, maybe? Cannot hear you.
Ok. Direi che proseguiamo. Ringraziamo Amel.
So let's continue. Thank you, Mel, for your testimonies. The next intervention is Ladvihan Sakalog, that is from Turkey. Ladvihan is coordinator of a unit Women for Equality and Freedom. It is multi-ethnic feminist organization for right of reproductive rights of women, and she gave a very good contribution against violence in Istanbul. So the floor is Ajhan's. Thank you.
Seminar about the care paradigm, which has become an important issue to discuss for women's struggles worldwide. Please receive the greetings of the women of our committees in Turkey. COVID-19 pandemic has revealed many things about gender inequality in Turkey and all around the world. The whole world has talked and understood more and more about women's labor is exploited in layers, that violence against women is the subject of politics, and how vital the need for care is, and how essential public services are. With the pandemic, women's employment, which was already low, decreased even more in Turkey. The female workforce has reduced by 8.3% in the last year. Currently, one out of every 4 women is not working in my country. Since face-to-face education could not be provided for about a year and a half, and the public nursery services had already been eliminated, the time allocated to home care services increased significantly. Due to the recognition of women are the natural undertakers of child care, this time was much longer for women than for men. Moreover, besides the care, the burden of children's education was also weighted upon women. Women also left their full-time jobs and turned to part-time and low-paid jobs to care of their children, the elderly, and the sick at home. Informal, insecure, and piecework increased among women, and they became even poorer. Dear friends, it is unimaginable for the impoverished woman to get rid of neither housework nor the burden of care of their children and patients. Moreover, divorcing an abusive and violenter husband is out of the question for the impoverished woman too, because you have to be economically free to achieve these kind of things under capitalism. It is clear that impoverishment played a role in the increase in violence against women during the pandemic, as well as the increase in the time spent at home. In Turkey, the care crisis has another important consequence. Thousands of girls dropped out of school. This is because the electronic devices and equipment such as computers, telephones, and the internet, which are necessary for virtual education, are impossible for impoverished proletarian families to access. If they could, then it is the boys' priority among siblings to hold them. Girls had to undertake the roles of traditionally womanhood at an early age during the pandemic. They helped their mother, who had to prepare dry food for winter at home, and took on the responsibility of caring for the younger brother. And the result was dropping out of school for the girls again. Also, childhood marriages were the other reason and the result at the same time for dropout of girls from school. We are sure that the number of pregnancies in childhood will increase, which will probably be reflected in the coming years' research and reports. Briefly, dear friends, women began to lose what they have earned for decades. These results have been published in many journals, emphasized in the reports of international institutions and non-governmental organizations, and reported statistically. The indoors has become more visible in the pandemic, and the invisible care work of the woman has met to eye with all its majesty. Pandemic also indicated outdoor care services. The fall of the organization of the health system, the inadequacy of kindergartens and nurseries was realized once more. The dominance of the market economy in services such as health and education, which are the principal human rights, cost people's lives. This reality was seen in various ways and in true stories. For example, a nurse lost her children in a fire, whom she had to leave at home when she was at work. The court gave the child custody to the father, depending on the occupational risk of a nurse mother, and another has committed suicide, etc. Another fact has also been realized by humanity, and also in my country. It is the women who work in important sectors like education, health, and the food industry worldwide. We educate, we feed, and we care. Capitalism immediately began to produce a response to all of these. They got applauded. They got applauded, the healthcare workers, 70% of whom were women, who were exhausted under the heavy workload in the pandemic, and whose rights to retirement and resignation were taken away, and they cleared their conscience. Then they glorified motherhood again with propaganda videos and rhetorics, saying heaven is under the feet of the mothers, and they preserved a place for us from the skies for our sacred duties. However, applause, prayers, or spaces reserved from us from the sky were not what we needed. We want to send our children to healthy and qualified nurseries and schools, entrust our loved ones to reliable hospitals, and live in safe houses. What we need is public health, public education, etc., where the market is not decisive. It is clear that we had an understanding. Pandemic has condemned for everything wrong, our unemployment, poverty, and physical and mental health deteriorated due to the increased burden of housework and care. Pandemic has been condemned. First, they asked us to hold on for a while. They claimed that our work and family life would become more harmonious with a flexible working regime and working from home. They said that the capitalism would arise to prosperity if the neoliberal era ended, etc., etc. What they did was to prevent us from seeking an unequal and free system that we all deserved. However, the women's struggle, which has been the most active social dynamic for years, has gained a character of anti-order in the pandemic period. We knew very well that all kinds of public care services were destroyed in the neoliberal period of capitalism. Moreover, care work has been contemned for a long time, and women's labor has been trivialized. But there exists an apparent reality now. The woman issue is not a virility issue. The reasoning for deepening gender inequalities, increased violence against women, oppression of women, double exploitation of women is exactly capitalism's, class societies. With this fact, the anti-capitalist character of the women's struggle is tragic. This is what matters to us, because we have the responsibility of developing tools for this. The most critical tool is solidarity. In some localities, the popular strata even have claimed to their self-organized solidarity activities. And in Turkey, our organization had established women solidarity committees last year. Now, I have only 1 minute.
Aslian, 1 minute more.
Okay, I will complete it in a minute. Now we are organizing women who have elderly patients that have taken care of at home, the idea that widespread public care centers are our rights. We run a petition in some localities for the rights to the nursery, which is in fact not on the main agenda of women's struggle, but the plan of public opposition, but because the care crisis affects the woman's life most. While protesting the abolition of the Istanbul Convention, we are also shouting out that secularism is indispensable for women. We are organizing the demand for an order in which unemployment is prohibited for all human and no one can assert the right to work. We raise our voice against the loss of health, resources and future of humanity, which has in fact the potential to overcome all the problems it faces with the advances of society and technology. Just one thing I want to say. Humanity deserves the good. We are determined to eliminate racism, nationalism, and discrimination, and we will definitely move forward and win. Thank you to all.
Grazie, grazie tantissimo Aslian per il tuo intervento passionale.
Thank you for your intervention, full of passion. And I know that it is possible to do it, to have your written interventions to be published. We have this possibility. Now I have Mona Hussein. She is from Palestine. She lives in Great Britain. She is a writer and a journalist and a filmmaker. And she is from the Mishmar for Democracy. And she wrote many papers about Palestine and Israel. And it is in the British periodics and in Arabic too. The floor is yours, Mona.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start. The title of my speech is called My Voice is My Weapon. Forgive me, I have a dry throat. Shut up, don't talk anymore. We don't want the true story of Palestine to be brought to the world. I found choosing what to discuss in this seminar one of the most challenging. There's so many areas I want to, as a Palestinian, as a woman, as a mother, that I would like to share with you beyond COVID and its devastation to occupied Palestine. I could point out the bombing of Gaza during a worldwide pandemic that killed 2 doctors running the COVID-19 ward, the destruction of the only COVID lab, damage to 6 hospitals, and the killing of children and innocent civilians, dismissed as collateral damage. Or the delay of vaccine doses to Gaza from Russia and their delivery made conditional by right-wing politicians who insisted on the return of the bodies of 2 soldiers killed in the 2014 assault on Gaza. Or the proposed swap of 1 million Pfizer doses nearing their expiry date in exchange for a future consignment of Pfizer to the Palestinian Authority, making it impossible in that time available to use, and in addition, making a proviso that none would go to Gaza. I could highlight the following: denial of the colonial settler occupier of the West Bank, thereby discharging their responsibilities for health of the occupied population under the Geneva Convention, the vaccine apartheid, the increase of violence towards women in lockdown, rising to 70 calls a day during the pandemic from a previous 10 in Gaza. I could point out the many personal tragedies. For young Gaza student Fatma al-Uluk, whose whole family, 22, were obliterated by the occupiers' bombardment in May. She lost her family, her home, her job. I could stress what it's like to live under decades-long occupation of having your home seized for settlers or destroyed. Roadblocks, travel bans, discrimination, humiliation, apartheid. There's so many stories to tell, yet Palestinian voices for decades have been silenced and submerged by a powerful dominant narrative of the occupier. We've been demonized, victimized, dehumanized. But I'm not going to focus on these important issues, but to paraphrase the word of Muna al-Kurd, the occupier does not want the truth, and why that should terrify all of us. There are 2 threads on this I want to raise, as both in their own way are changing the conversation at the attempts to erase Palestinian identity and reality. First, the targeting and threats towards institutions, academics, journals, and the threat to freedom of speech and academic freedom. Second, the emerging Palestinian voices that are changing the landscape and the narrative of the Palestinian story. Special interest groups and a vast array of networks through lobbyists have put extreme pressure on academics, government actors, and universities to censor or punish Palestinian advocacy. This targeting and censorship of any voice that highlights the Palestinian reality is what should be of concern to all of us, irrespective of which side of the political divide we stand on this issue. It goes beyond the excellent dual autobiography by Malika Shauka and Rebecca Gould, appropriately titled The Palestinian Exception to Academic Freedom. Their essay highlights the lack of support they experience from their respective universities. Malaka, then a Palestinian PhD student at Exeter, and Rebecca, an American associate professor at Bristol. Both were accused of anti-Semitism. Rebecca, for an article she had written in 2011, Beyond Anti-Semitism, and Malaka for tweets several years earlier when she was in Gaza. While their experiences were very different, with Malaka subject to racism and personal attacks, they shared the lack of support from their institutions that were being pressurized to censor them. For me, what is most disturbing aspect of this targeting of Palestinian advocacy and voices is the slippery road of allowing censorship through the back door and capitulating to the threats and smear campaigns for political agendas, corrupting one of the most fundamental principles of democracy: freedom of speech, academic freedom. And it won't stop at this particular conflict if we don't address it full on. It's irrelevant who the perpetrator is. It's the principle we should all be supporting of freedom of speech and academic freedom. We should all be alarmed and concerned by the savage, and I use this word deliberately, by the persistent, consistent policy of the occupier to threaten and bully international institutions, publications, human rights organizations, academics, doctors who speak out based on extensive research and studies on the abuses and injustices of the occupiers. We need to bypass political propaganda by state actors or otherwise and focus. Why these voices being silenced by our own institutions? For fear of financial reprisals? Smear campaigns? That undermines the independence. And what does that mean to democracy as a whole? The British Medical Lancet highlighted in its editorial in June this year, political censorship in academic journal sets a new precedent. In March last year, it published a letter signed by several eminent researchers and doctors alerting the medical community of the impact of COVID-19 on the Gaza Strip. They pointed out that decades of structural violence had brought the healthcare system to a point of collapse. The impact and devastation of an overcrowded area with Palestinians denied the right of return to their villages from 1948, the illegal closures and blockades since 2007, and the collective punishment regularly meted out by the occupier. This all translated into a delayed supply of vaccines to Gaza and delayed testing. However, publication of this letter created a seismic reaction, with the journal being threatened by a boycott. The letter has now been removed. What is shocking and deeply worrying about this is the political pressure that was brought to bear on a paper because it was deemed politically unpalatable. And this has serious repercussions worldwide on academic freedom in peer-reviewed journals and amounts to censorship, as withdrawal was based solely on political propaganda. And this wasn't some isolated incident. In 2014, the journal had been targeted with threat of sanctions after it published a letter condemning the morbidity and mortality in Gaza, resulting from the occupier state violence against Palestinians in Gaza. The journal, subsequently to appease the occupier, dedicated a special edition to the occupier's healthcare system, which ignored the historical and political forces impacting Palestinian health. Due to the time constraints, I won't go into the details of the recent dismissal of Professor David Miller of political sociology at Bristol University who was accused of anti-Semitism for his remarks in a lecture calling the occupier a violent, racist, foreign regime engaged in ethnic cleansing. You know, this is a slippery road for both freedom of speech and academic freedom and the ugliness of true anti-Semitism. But it's not only academics and institutions that are targeted and threatened. Commercial institutions and celebrities are highly susceptible and are often bullied into silence with the threat of having their contracts or sponsorship withdrawn. Take Palestinian model Kaher Herhash.
Mona,
yeah.
Excuse me. Mona, 1 minute more.
Okay, actually, I'm just finishing up. I mean, basically, what I want to say is that these Palestinian voices are bypassing the cacophony of noise and corrupted narratives. And we need to listen to this. I mean, I'm cutting it obviously very brief. And this last year has seen enormous shifts for Palestinians with the challenges of COVID, the increasing targeting of advocates for Palestine, and we need to listen to this. I mean, I'm cutting it challenges of COVID, the increasing targeting of advocates for Palestine, and we need to listen to this. I mean, I'm cutting it challenges of COVID, the increasing targeting of advocates for Palestine, and we need to listen to this. I mean, I'm cutting it challenges of COVID, for it undermines our own freedom. The destruction and censorship of academic freedom, the right to free speech and legitimate criticism on occupation, apartheid, and the threat to the institutions, individuals, or commercial entities based exclusively on political agenda or prejudice is against all of us. By allowing censorship of the voices that express our realities, you severely limit the development of thoughtful and caring communication. Thank you. Communities, sorry.
Ok.
Thank you.
Bene, allora grazie anche a Mona ed ora la parola a Tiffany John Smith dagli Stati Uniti. Tiffany è presidente della Texas Teen Day Foundation e conduce la The African American Network, che è una televisione. Quindi darei subito la parola a Tiffany Johnson Smith, chiedendole di rispettare i 10 minuti di tempo e di dire in che lingua parla, immagino però inglese. Vai Tiffany. C'è Tiffany? Se non c'è Tiffany, passo all'altra relatrice. Qualcuno me lo può dire? Se Tiffany c'è? Bene, allora io darei la parola alla successiva relatrice, poi se Tiffany fa un cenno la facciamo parlare dopo Nadiezhda Arzighina. Quindi darei la parola a Nadiezhda Arzighina dalla Russia, che è giornalista, è direttora di PEN Moscow, parte della Russian Writer Union e board member of Articolo 19, è stata nel Gender Council of the Federation of Journalists Russia e vicepresidente della Federazione Europea dei Giornalisti, attivista per diritti dei giornalisti e libertà di stampa, cultura e politiche di genere. Segue progetti per istituzioni internazionali. La parola a Nadiezhda.
Buongiorno a tutti, good afternoon. I'm happy to be with you. All the best from Russia. One small correction. I was Vice President of European Federation of Journalists from 2013 until 2019. I am not Vice President anymore. My 2 terms were over. And I should tell you that I felt very inspired by this conversation, but by all our speakers. And it reminded me old happy time when we were working on Beijing conference on status of women. It was time of fantastic enthusiasm and inspiration. And it was the first time when we Russian feminists and women activists felt ourselves as members of global feminist family. And it was a global trend. It was really fantastic and happy time. Now we find ourselves in absolutely different situation. World, especially after 9/11, is divided more and more. Women's conditions all over the globe are becoming tougher and tougher. And in my country, in Russia, we have dramatic changes. I would like to remind you that Russia was the first country which had fantastic experiment 100 years ago when women got equal rights with men. And gender equality became for several decades part of official propaganda. Of course, it was superficial sometimes. Of course, it was hypocrisy. But anyway, 3 generations, my grandmother was a feminist. She was from working family. She was the first woman chief geologist in a mine in Kuzbas, in very important region. So when we got democracy, after collapse of Soviet Union, women's organizations began to appear like mushrooms after the rain. And before Beijing, we had hundreds of women's groups, very different in every big city and small town. And women literally saved Russia during first wild market wave. Women helped families, women helped children, women helped themselves. They learned a lot. They started new businesses, started new lives, and they support others. And by 2000, 2 million people got working places in third sector, in NGOs, and many of them were led by women. Women became really powerful force. Unfortunately, now we see that women's movement is quite puzzled. We can say that all NGOs face lots of problems, especially with new legislation devoted to so-called list of so-called foreign agents. And more than 100 organizations just stopped their activities because of that. Many journalists and women journalists and many independent media have been included into this list. And I'm happy that not long ago, new Nobel Peace Prize awardee Dmitry Muratov started new campaign for stopping this legislation and this shameful practice. But anyway, what we face now, we face that we need solidarity even more than before. In this divided and puzzled environment, we need dialogue with our colleagues, with our sisters from all other countries. What I see now, I would like to share with you very briefly what we faced during pandemic time. We face now 4th wave of pandemic in Russia. Today we have new anti-record, more than 1,000 died people in 24 hours. We never had anything like that. There are many reasons, and just this 5 minutes I got a sad news that very prominent journalist Maya Peshkova from Echo of Moscow independent radio station died from COVID. Women die from COVID. Women face triple pressure during this time. In lockdown or self-isolation work, we face a new self-isolation system now. First of all, according to recent survey, women's income decreased since the beginning of pandemic. 2 years ago, it was 27% less than males' income. Now it's 29% less. Women lose their jobs very often. Women are squeezed for freelancing or precarious work. Women face double and triple burden. There was a survey in Russia that men working in self-isolation, they sometimes increase their professional skills and make their career. Usually women do not do that because women are responsible for kids, for their studies at schools, being at home. Women are responsible for other relatives and for men. Women are burned out. Another point, domestic violence increased from 2 to 3 times in Russia during pandemic. And during top moment of pandemic, crisis centers and shelters were closed and women couldn't move to shelter. Fortunately, after protests, they started working. Another point is abortion. During top pandemic, all operations and abortions never took place and many women had no access to abortion. On the other hand, patriarchal movements and radical activists supported by Orthodox Church and all other religious organizations increased campaign against abortion. Russia was first country in the world to allow free abortion, and another point that during Soviet time it was the only method of family planning. Fortunately, after international cooperation started, after long way of activities of family planning association, now rates of abortions in Russia are similar to European one. But there is a new threat that, like in Poland, abortion could be prohibited in Russia. And new initiatives in our parliament and deputies from newly elected parliament, some of them are very radical, anti-feminist and anti-women and pro-traditionalist, so we could face new legislation. So, another point, that our legislation pushed
Nadezhda, 1 minute more.
1 minute more. Anyway, women's movement in Russia exists. A new generation of feminists came to the picture, and initiatives like Russian Me Too, I'm not afraid to say, Sexist of the Year, it's very interesting initiative devoted to popular culture, Feminist Summer's That, and the FemFest and others. And women of Russia, together with women of the United States, just established a dialogue, which is very important, which could remind dialogue of former Soviet Union and the US against nuclear armament, for the disarmament against nuclear threat. And I think that women could make difference in any way if we could be together. Thank you very much.
Grazie a te, Nadezhda, per questa grande
Thank you very much for your testimony, very powerful. I would like now to have the floor to Simona Grazzi, that is No Profit Campaign. Simona, you are present. Now the floor is yours. 10 minutes, please. The floor is yours. My name is Simona Grazzi. I will speak Italian. I will start by saying the experience of all the women of the world. Last month, I am here as the member of the organization. I'm a part of the European campaign. In the last month, we started, and you saw a systematic discussion about a sanitary emergency, taking account of many elements present. With the right of the girls going to school, the right of patients, so on and so forth. You can talk about many examples. It's difficult to discuss it. There is a problem of audio. I cannot translate well like this, saying the Italian translator. So you have 300 organizations involved. So we have a collection of assignment. So we have mobilization to discuss a bit about the quality of the audio of the speaker is difficult to be translated. The interpreters' teams are facing problems with the audio.
Simona, chiedono di parlare piano, chiedono di parlare lentamente per la traduzione.
Va bene.
Grazie.
È stata invece l'ennesima dimostrazione della sottomissione dei governi almeno dei paesi ricchi.
So it was the demonstrations of the capitalist interest, and you have the health of the people implicated. So we have the intellectual property. There is a clause that we can have
è che in caso di emergenza potrebbe esserci bisogno di una ingente quantità di un vaccino, di un antidoto, che potrebbe quindi essere superiore rispetto a quanto la singola azienda detentrice del brevetto possa produrre. Tuttavia, da questa prospettiva e solo da questa prospettiva, la pandemia non è stata considerata un'emergenza.
So the pandemic is not considered an emergency. You have 4 million of deaths, and you can see here that until now we are seeing, but no step is being done to have the vaccines free. It's okay, this speed now? I think it's so far so good now. So in different moments, when you have our organization talked about these aspects, so you have these patent suspensions, but we had to go back because of the demonstrations of the big companies. The requests in South Africa, and you had 100 countries of the world where we had to produce our own vaccines, but it was not possible to have these in the north of the planet. So you know what happened, inequality in the distributions of the dosage of the vaccines in the world. So now the vaccines are available. So when you are having the third dose of vaccines in Africa, you have less than 10% of the population that had these doses of vaccines. It's not only a problem of justice. The virus circulating will produce variants, and you can have different types and possibility, or can be not resistant. They can have resistance to the vaccine. So you can have this pandemic for a long time with this transmission, this perspective. is in the lives of many of us, and for the company it can be a guarantee of profits for such a long time. The multinationals, the dosages will be even more expensive than nowadays.
Mondiale della Sanità, la WHO, ha parlato di un oltraggio morale riferendosi all'iniqua distribuzione dei vaccini nel mondo. E su questo tema anche l'universo scientifico si è espresso, in quanto...
The scientific universe talked about these matters. We've had some articles that published this problem. The scientific magazine The Lancet, for example, published an appeal for the presentation of public patents, and this publication in August had an article talking about how the suspension of patents should be considered as this lack of licensing for the countries to promote vaccines could be an attempt, a threat to humanity. The WTO acronym, we should take a look at this crucial knot, or we are going to block these rights to produce their own vaccine, or we have the right to universal health. I guess it's important to sign up for this petition, and as was done before, we have to make a commitment for this struggle, because the struggle goes beyond profit. This profit is not compatible to cure health and to all of this COVID matter, which was published before. Thank you, Simona, for the respect and exact respect to the time. Now we have Maura Consuta. She comes from Italy. She's graduated in medicine and surgery. She has exercised the pressure, the function of hematologist. She, until recently, worked as a consultant. Maura. Maura, are you there? Are you present? Yes, I'm here. Do you listen to me? Okay. Well, now I'm going to begin talking about lockdown. The beginning was in March 8th, so for the first time we couldn't do the feminist manifestation. So it was a very ugly sign, let's say, because then we had a terrible period that changed concrete lives, but also the way of thinking of many women. It was a completely different experience, because contemporarily, in all countries of the world, many women and men verified and experimented the same emotions: mourning, death, vulnerability, but also the interdependence, the codependence. And together with all of that dread of those months, came a movement of solidarity came up in Rome and in the rest of Italy. We had solidarity in actions, and not only young women, but all ages were protagonists. And after we met after the lockdown in the House of Women, we had an interesting, very interesting event, because we wanted to find and understand what had happened, and we listened to the dramas, for example, depressions that were caused by COVID, and we had discomfort and solitude. So it was necessary to listen, but mainly we should understand, we had to understand we had a sanitary crisis, but also a crisis in care. For example, abuse is a very ambivalent word that doesn't mean a biological destiny for the women. It's not an individual experience. It's actually a social right that makes us have a public responsibility. For the first time, we use this word, saying that we had a crisis in care because we uncovered the lack of an importance of social and work rights, the need for life integrally. And we understood also something that we talked about all these years, but that had been removed. Some people consider it ideology, factions. We understood actually that the policies, the liberal policies of precarization, of dismounting the welfare state had come to an end. So this paradise of profit, actually COVID uncovered all of that reality. And this unfortunately was not heard yet. The public health is unsubstitutable. The social welfare is unsubstitutable. All of that drama, there isn't a coherent criticism to this means of production, this of consumption that produces inequality and slavery, and it actually has an impact. We are actually all on the same boat. It was not the same for the Italian citizen and the migrant. For those that had a house where they could also work remotely, and we had actually another scenario for those that didn't have those things. It was not the same also for men and women. COVID had on the center the gender as a political position. This is old. We had two sides, reproduction and social division of labor. It's important to say also that COVID explained to us the nexus between liberalism and patriarchy. There is actually a narrow union between the liberal policies that dismounted the welfare state and the patriarchy that condemns women into a role of feminist welfare. This difference between patriarchy and liberalism is very strong, and we should reflect among us in our network of women as the amount that we have changed and how it was possible, how this represented a continuity of liberalism. And this makes us lose our influence. And this is something that should be solved. And as we said before in this great assembly, it is necessary to have another narrative, not a modernization, development, or technology. In other words, to improve this capitalism with the same old recipes, it's necessary to have another narrative from the needs of lives, but also in concrete actions of women. So it would be necessary to have another approach that does not continue this neoliberalism. We should give a chance to the gender equality policies. I believe this is an extremely important point, and I guess we should discuss, and it should be the main reason for the debate. And from the point of view of the feminist movement, we are protagonists, but also maybe they do not have such influence. In Italy, one woman of two does not work. most of the positions, of the work positions that were lost was of women. Five from 10 women, out of 10 women, say that their positions in work decreased because they continue depending on their husbands or their kids. And a lot of them have lost their work. So the work position talks about this torture of the system, and this welfare state and infrastructure are not a priority yet. We discussed in PNR this matter in Europe. It should have been an occasion in Europe, and it was criticized because there is not any consciousness of why this crisis happened. There is no consciousness of the causes and no strategies. We have the same old recipes. So we repeat, we need another approach, especially the unity of women. It is extremely difficult to happen, this union, because we have differences, and it's important to recognize those. The society cannot be an animism. The unit cannot be an animism. It is important to recognize the different experiences, but also together with that, it is necessary to have a conflict. So I believe this meeting is very important today, at least for me, because it made this consciousness to come up, which is important to instruct and to build these women's networks, the houses of women, because then we can have an elaboration and strength of women. So the networks on an international level are important to build connections. We cannot do all of this alone. The system built inequalities and also practices of resistance and new projects as a society and as a community. So we should have the capacity as radical feminists to connect to the youth in Friday for Future community, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, and to get associated to the women of these institutions that want to make a pact. I repeat, this should be against the patriarchy and against liberalism in our contemporary years. We should be against this, not against only the system, but against the policy, the right policies that do not consider the organizations of women, consider it genetic. Without it, we're not going to have fundamental changes. And especially with women, we're going to have the possibility to make a revolution of cure that serves the world and the planet and mainly society and our lives. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maura. You respected completely the time. We thank you a lot for that. Now, I give the role of moderator to Nora, which is going to also speak. Thank you, Nicoletta. Can you hear me well? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Now I'm going to summon from Germany, the Institute of International League of Women, responsible for the European Corporation. Are you Heidi? Are you there, Heidi? Yes, thank you. I don't know. What language are you going to speak in? I'm going to speak English, okay.
Sì. Non so se c'è la possibilità di mettere le mie PowerPoint, ma se no comincio così.
I don't know if there is the possibility to have my PowerPoint presentation. Continue like this. Okay, we're going to have the projection.
So, all your testimonies are an enormous motivation to struggle together for a transformative agenda. And I wanted to start with just an idea of this is not new. And the question of no care, no peace has a long story of more than 100 years. Just 3 citations which go very closely in what you expressed all in the last hours. In 1915, Lida Gustava Heimann, one of the founding mothers of WILF, said, "The economy must serve the needs of the people and not those of profit and privileges." At the same time, the women understood women can never be protected in war. And a little bit later, with the experiences of the disaster of World War I, Anita Augsburg, also one of these wonderful pacifist women, said, "We women don't just to have to heal the wounds, we have to prevent that wounds are done anymore." And I think this is really important, still extremely actual, to see this connection between care and peace on the economic level as well as on the level of protection and of really prevention. The next, please. Can you go to the next slide, please? In this next slide, I don't have to talk again about this triangle because you all mentioned it, between militarized understanding of peace and security, or securitization of the debate, and of patriarchy and of capitalism. The results, more than in the year 2000, was that finally this was done into an international agenda from the United Nations in the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And I think you all know about this resolution 1325 and other resolution, where we have all most of our countries' national action plans. The problem is this was very important because it took up protection, prevention and participation of women in this transformative agenda. The problem is that since 2000, this is kind of a formal, it's very formalized, and it has not really implemented in the understanding of the women who created this Women, Peace and Security agenda in really a transformative agenda, putting in question this triangle. The next, please. In my organization, the next slide, please. In my organization, WILF, who was founded in 1915, we always said, can you please change to the next slide? That we have to move the money from war to peace. And we tried it in a lot of symbolic ways, because, and this was clear, and what I heard in all your presentations, the money is, it's not the question that there is no money. The money is spent wrongly by our states, by our industry, and we have to get it back for the real needs of the people. And education, culture, healthcare, including, of course, sexual and reproductive rights and health and a decent life in dignity, sustainable environment, and also the way of seeing friends instead of enemies at the first thing, respect and solidarity. These are all where we need the money. It's not just money that we need. Of course, we need the solidarity of the people, and but the solidarity is not enough. We really need a substantial economic shift. The next one, please. If we say no care, no peace, we have to start all where we are. But we cannot forget what is the problem of our neighbor, of the people living with us. And can you please go to the next slide? Yeah. Okay. And the sentence is, that to reach a gender just form of peace, we therefore have to acknowledge care work as peace building and transform the conditions under which it is performed. So I'm referring to a wonderful brochure done in Switzerland, where I took also this slogan, no care, no peace. But it's the same if we work, and you all mentioned it, on the climate issues, this looking what the people around us need and what we ourselves need to live a different life is extremely important. And the internal peace, if I may say, is as important as a starting point also for all the peace building that we want to do and we are standing for in external relationship. I want to end up with the next slide of wonderful examples. If we say that the care is not implemented, there are so many important examples where the caring for the other is in the center. And okay, just some examples. Okay, then I can do it without this slide anyway. We have, as coming from a country who is one of the major weapons exporter, we are fueling conflicts and wars all over the world. And with the actual, and this has to end. And this is our link from still relatively democratic, relatively peaceful country, Germany. We have an enormous responsibility in externalizing problems all over the world. We have at the same time a strong responsibility not to close our borders all over Europe. This tendency, which is very actual when we talk about the refugees coming through Belarus at the moment, that we have our governments all over Europe now say that new walls, new fences, we need them on our European borders. What does it say, for example, for Serbia, or what for the relationship between Greece and Turkey and this?
Katie,
What?
Scusa, hai un minuto ancora?
Yeah, I think what the women really need is to strengthen this solidarity and the links between those who are kind of outsourcing, externalizing the problems, and those who are suffering from the problems. And it's all the questions on what really makes us safe and how to spread the or how to organize solidarity beyond borders. I had made the examples from very recently from the border between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where the women relate on their relationship beyond borders, the same in Ukraine. And this is the only way of answering to this militarized regime, and dialogue, you all said it, is really needed. I see actually in Germany the negotiations for a new government. The only thing that they have in mind is a new wave of digitalization and being strong economically. This is not the world we want to go, and therefore I think in solidarity between all of us, it's so important to stand for a transformative agenda, and we need peace all. Thank you.
Grazie Heidi. Le tue parole sono state molto interessanti e molto belle. Grazie. Adesso introduciamo Tiffany John Smith degli Stati Uniti. Tiffany, sei collegata?
Grazie. Are you connected, Judith?
Foundation.
She is the president of the foundation that conducts American networking. Yes?
In English.
You're going to speak in English, right? I'd like to say thank you to the organization for this opportunity to speak here. Thank you.
I listened to everything that everyone else had to say today. And once I got on, once I was able to get onto the platform, and I listened before. In the United States, when the pandemic hit, I think everyone saw what happened here, that we had chaos, that we had misinformation, and many things that went on that didn't help our situation. But I have to say that when it comes down to women and the people, noi siamo più forti insieme. We're stronger together. Our people came together. And some of the things that we did in terms of healthcare equity because the pandemic really revealed that we had inequity and have inequity across the board in the United States, and most especially in healthcare. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the little microcosm within which I work, which is kidneys. In the kidney population, there is something called estimated glomerular filtration rate, and it is how we determine whether the kidney is healthy or functioning properly. Within that, we single out African Americans. Well, when the pandemic hit, and we saw George Floyd's life snuffed out in 8 minutes and 46 seconds, everything changed in the United States in terms of what people were willing to talk about and look at. Because some of the most difficult questions and most difficult conversations within our nation are not had because it's an uncomfortable conversation. And all of a sudden people took to the streets. The conversation had to be had because we were not going to not have it any longer. Well, that coupled with the pandemic really made me and every other leader assess what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we could be most effective for the people that we serve. So in that, we began to dialogue with people that we never dialogued with before, across avenues that we hadn't in the past. And I challenge everyone to think about who our tribe is. Who's your tribe? Find your tribe. Who are the people that are going to work with you to achieve your outcome? Because all of a sudden, our little silos didn't work. We could see that they didn't work. We were all separated in our homes and trying to figure out how we were going to serve people and help the underserved, because that's our job. How will we serve the underserved when we're locked away? How are we going to serve the underserved when they don't trust us? So building inroads with the people that we want to serve is one thing that we had to do. Well, we had already been doing that within our organization, building inroads with folks. But we had to find new allies, and we did. We had to reach across party lines, because my statement to our constituents here, to our legislators and leaders here, is the same that I think you might want to look at for your legislators and leaders, and that is, there is no economic engine if the people are sick. If everybody's sick, you don't have an economy. And COVID-19 has taught us that not only is there a death toll attached to COVID-19, but there is also what we are seeing coming out in the data now about what COVID-19 does and the residual effects of it. So if we don't provide health care that is affordable to Americans, we won't have an America. We won't have a Texas. We won't have the things. And
you have 1 minute yet.
I'm sorry. So those are the things that we put a lot of emphasis on. And I say to everyone here, when we walk into a room, one of the things that I had to pull together was know my outcome. I know this is what the outcome is that I want. I've lost 12 family members to chronic kidney disease. So listening to people tell me that there's not a genetic link to this, or there's not, that I can't. You can't do that. That's not what we always do. Take what we always do and throw it in the cracker, ladies. because what we always do, obviously, is not working. What we always do has gotten us to this point. That is why we are all sitting here on this Zoom call. That is why our nations have been brought to their knees. When you're brought to your knees, you need to sit down and think about what's going on, instead of trying to go back to shutting off our borders, pushing people away who are in need. If we're supposed to be the benevolent benefactor, then act like it. Act like it and listen to people. The best way to aid any crisis is to stop and listen. Listen to the needs of the people that are in crisis, instead of trying to find someone to blame for the crisis. We don't let our kids do that. We don't let our kids do that. We make them play nice in the sandbox, own their stuff. I was going to say another word. If they misbehave, you own with your actions. So if there's anything I can say to you, I will tell you the same thing I've been saying to every legislator, every wannabe politician, pseudo politician, and actual politician in this nation that I run into. Be the change that we need you to be. When people elect legislators, they don't elect you to hold steady to a party. They elect you to make their lives better. So what we did was immediately started with legislation. Everything changes in the United States based on local, state, and national legislation. If you have that same system, go for it. Do not back down. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't. If you need somebody to bolster you up, get my information from Alex. Call me, because I'll talk you through it, because it's only going to, what we are fighting for right now is the souls of our nations. We are fighting for the souls of our nation. We are fighting for the future of our children and our children's children. And the only people who seem to give a damn about all of this are women. We have the passion, the drive, and the ability to do things that nobody else on this planet can get done. So one of my reasons for even wanting to come here was to say, ladies and gentlemen, anybody who realizes that there is power in women and family and choice, that we're not to be subjugated to men or to some law or rule that someone else is trying to impose upon us. Our bodies are our own. Our choices are our own. You know, I keep hearing this, oh, we're doing this because God is leading us to do it. The first thing I learned as a child and as a baby Christian, I am a Christian. The first thing I learned was, what are we supposed to do? Our job is to choose Christ, right? We're to choose him. So why then would we come around and begin to impose our will on other people? That's not the job.
Devo chiedere per favore di andare alla conclusione.
So, choice. We need to think about everyone. We're the ones who think about everyone. Think about the needs of the people, because that's what needs to happen right now. This earth has been silenced from one end to the other with COVID-19. I leave you with, you have within you the ability to affect change in your corner of the earth. Marshall McLuhan, a futurist, said, the world is a global village. So what are you going to do in your piece of the village? Because I can tell you, ladies, I'm going to stand and fight and do the things we need done in my Eastern village.
Per favore, Tiffany, ti devo chiedere di chiudere perché stanno aspettando.
Thank you. Yeah, you have to finish, right? Thank you. Thank you. Good luck. Now I'm going to call whom? Let's see, she's connected. Judith, are you here? Can you understand me? Yeah, we can listen to you fine, Millie. She's an economist. She's retired. In which language are you going to talk, Judith? I will speak French. So remember, 10 minutes, please, for you, right? So let's be in time. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. I will be talking about epidemic, how we have this in Hungary. We have to say that the first situation, the first wave in 2020, we didn't have any problem. The confinement was quick, it was not abrupt. As you could see in Italy, in France, here people respected. What meant was that in summertime we had 0 sick people. I believe that the pandemic could stop there, but unfortunately, and by financial reasons and the touristic industry, we opened the borders, everybody could circulate, and in autumn, because actually, by any reason, we thought that the old Soviet countries would be less started by the pandemic because you had a good vaccination. So we were very optimistic about that. But in autumn, it was the contrary what happened. The death mortality is one of the highest. And the problem was because now we are seeing what happened in the Western world. Because of COVID, we had to close the services in hospitals. So when you had deaths, it was not because of COVID, but the other types of cares that you couldn't have available, because COVID-19 was the investment of the medical teams, and you have 70% of the population. We are vaccinated, it's not that bad. But the problem is that 40% of people are not vaccinated because they do not want to be vaccinated. You have fake news, you have rumors about that. So there are rumors against scientists because of internet. It circulates very rapidly against vaccine information. Against the vaccines. In the Western world, you have side effects. You have the disease, it's not the disease, you know, it's dangerous, but it's not as dangerous as is being talked. So our government invested the vaccination, invested on vaccinations. They imported Chinese and Russian vaccines, and rapidly everybody that wanted could be vaccinated. But now, I believe that the 40% who are not vaccinated, but they don't want to be vaccinated because of fake news. And you have to stop it as a censorship. Even Facebook should be censored, or other types of medias. They should have censorship, but it's very difficult, what is the origin of these fake news? I believe that this origin comes from simple places. So the private industry want really to have a vaccination, but the population sometimes does not understand that. They wanted to have another care in another way. So the government, the European Union as a political entity, is weak when they have to have this dialogue with the big companies. They should have a counterbalance of these lobbies. I mean, the anti-vaccine industries. So we lost the opportunity because you didn't have the left wings, the unions, to really say the pharmaceutical industry should have a collective intelligence, the socialization, and you can have other words. In other words, it's not that bad. I mean, you cannot allow population being victimized by rumors, to have this decision maker politically oriented, that they are impacted by the big pharmaceutical industry that are against vaccines. So who are the most vulnerable people? The people that are less educated. The medium class, they know about vaccines and they are vaccinated almost 100%. But the vulnerability is in the less educated people, because they are more impacted by these fake news, rumors that are circulating. So the organization, as our organization, has this role to position openly. You have other sectors that you should consider as a collective property, as Parliament, for example. So we have a lot of people get rich because of fake news, and health should be equal for all. And all these false information, all these rumors are rational thinking mindset, I would say, because they say the political strategy of vaccination is not aligned with their interests as a big company. Nora, how many minutes I have? 2 minutes? All right. So if I have 2 minutes, I would like to say that I am an activist in the minimal salary that should be unconditional. And there is a European petition campaign. And if you are Europeans, please sign off this petition, because I believe that it would be one of the solutions for women and for all the women. And you could have a guaranteed condition that could make our life different if you had this guarantee. So you see the social violence and this unsafety and security and the precarity that women are living could be changed by a minimum salary. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. You are on time. Thank you for that. Now we are going to have the floor to Nora. Hello. Thank you very much. How are you? Thank you for you all. You'll be speaking Spanish, and thank you for listening to me. I will be together talking about cares, and I have important announcements. Thank you for the technical and translators, the technical support to translators, because this caring has to do with the international feminists. I am Nora. I'm from Spain, and I represent the International Assembly of Peoples. And I will talk about feminism and anti-imperialism. I will speak slowly to help the translators. So first, people is more than the absence of peace. Is they against the oppression systems that generate inequality and violence. And feminism challenges the oppression suffered by 51% of the population, women. Feminism gives an optical that amplifies our analysis, and you can have the voices to have a word that have life in the center and not the market. So you can see people in the planet, not only market in the planet. So peace is a precondition for life. You cannot only take care of the other but when you are in the war. So how can you take care of the planet when you have bombs making the planet without water, without land? But not only feminism and peace are ideas or a value or a theory. It's a political practice and a strategy to transform the material life into oppressors and oppressed people. And we are social people in the middle of this, and you are free people. So the fight where you have peace and feminism, they must be in our lives, women, and peace should be the center of our work when you are talking about the caring and the reproduction of this current situation. Women understand what we are talking about and are working with all of us, all together, people that are down in the umbrella of the work. So we are talking about a new liberalism, and you've been protagonists of revolutions. So we are a global screen that make the planet to go on. Now we are in this tipping point. We have a new opportunity window. How can you create opportunities in this capitalist crisis in a social, economical, and environmental level? It's time to take care of each other, and you agree upon that. And we're here exchanging knowledge and how you can position ourselves towards this crisis. How we're going to build up, what you want to build up together. You can do it together because you have a global challenges and you have to work together, taking into account our different realities. Is a global climate crisis that you are facing, and the feminism has to have the whys and the struggle for peace. It's not only to see the natural tests because you have the biological talents for that, but you have to understand cares as a leverage horizon in a social economical levels, and you can have this socially, and you have the interdependence of people with the planet, and you can see the anti-imperialism as the center of our fight. And you have to see this driving force that will provide practices and policies, because the sexual violence is a problem in Africa, because the women are victims of the wars. So you have to understand that the United States does not take responsibility. The United States is not hegemony anymore, and you can have a multipolar planet where China can be another power in terms of hegemony. And you know that the United States finance guerrilla terrorism and destroy the lives of people in many parts of the world, because these legismen say that the Africa is their own supermarket. It's like Africa have no people, no women, only goods and raw material. You know, the lives of women in Africa is worth less than the lives of a man. And talking about reproduction and sexuality, to talk about core family, and you have violence, and you have our bodies and minds being victimized by capitalism. You have our invisibility, and you have countries that care about us. There are other countries that do not care about that. You have wars that care about us, others do not. So the African women must be taken into consideration. So we have the worst condition of life, more violence on our bodies. You have to understand why it's necessary to have this problem that you have in Afghanistan, the occupation for 20 years. Who financed the Taliban? You know, imperialism is the answer for that. And you have to have the alliances to eradicate the violence against us and the war against the poverty. Anita Hajan, remember, you cannot erase our fights. The history of Afghanistan, you have to think about the first vice president woman and the first prime minister. It's an example. And you have other possible histories, other possible futures, other projects where the care must be seen to rethink the situation, because we had the imperialism, and you have the violence against women, and you have to separate consequences and strategies, because this patriarchal, racist situation is, you have to eradicate that. You are going to have next year in Madrid, OTAN meeting, and they have the Cold War against China. It will be a worldwide war, because they, different from Trump and Biden, wants our governments to be in a project in detriment of our bodies, our women bodies. They wanted to empower the scale of violence and militarism. You have to invest in public school, in employment. So they wanted to have an OTAN that can have a bombardment of Libya 3 days before the intervention of peace, where they have this African alliance. So they have the resolution of conflicts. So Libya today is worse than it was yesterday, and they have more division. They are in violence, and there is a mafia that is trafficking bodies, especially women. How you can articulate a democratic peace where negotiation dialogue comes from the bottom, from the care? You have to work with the pacifist movement. You have to articulate this movement, incorporate peace in our feminist work, and I hope I can count on you in Madrid, even if it's online. So the feminists say, we want a peace, the demilitarization of life in a model of security that can take care of us, of the planet, as women, as feminists, that we want to have the social transformation in the common senses, in the alliances, in the program, and you don't want to have militarism. Let's say, welcome to our feminist life. Okay?
Llamamos ahora a Rosy Zúñiga de México. Rosy, ¿estás conectada?
Sì, aquí estoy.
Bien, allora ti presento Rosy. Rosy è
segretario-geral. She's going to speak in Spanish. And you're going to have the translation available. You're going to have 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Nora, for the presentation. I am Rosa Zenigan, and as I was presented, I am a popular educator, sociologist, and also a member of the Latin American feminist movement. We're looking for justice to all violated and accused women in our territories. I would like to tell you that when I was invited by Alejandra, we were thinking about what other people we would have here to discuss with us. We are present in 21 countries in Latin America, and the reality we live is actually painful. And as we talk about George Floyd, we also remember, we have to remind ourselves of Marielle Franco, which was assassinated in Brazil, and at the same time, this has made us hurt. And we can actually count how many women were assassinated. For example, Betty Cariño was assassinated in the autonomous territory, and she was asking for food for her people that was locked. And we can remember about the Guatemala women, which were burned in March 8 in Guatemala, and the police left them locked, had them locked. They were locked with a padlock, and the police took care of, usually made them not to leave the place. So we actually talked to women that are not here. They are from IT, from the SOFA community that work in agricultural and solidarity agriculture, and they suffered abuse from these peace movements from the UN. We understand that as women that live in occupied territories, we understand the abuses, the violations that come from these movements. And now we have a young population that has no father and no mother, because a lot of them have passed away by a disease that was brought. This is a hypothesis. The communities say, and we can see that Haiti is one of the last countries to be independent. We also make organizations in the Caribbean, and we have a strong threat to women in Venezuela, Cuba, and because of this block that there are in these territories, the British and Dutch armies, a lot of pressures that we have on these territories. And at the same time, we demand the participation in movements Because in terms of pandemics in Cuba, for example, it was very severe. The non-entrance of products, as you know, the blocks from the United States have increased to 264 new restrictions that are limited to the amount of money that can be sent, and with the pandemics, we're suffering a lot. A lot of the strategies we are facing as women, we're taking as women from the peoples that you said, there's been the elaboration of popular communities, popular pens. Actually, these are organizations that make food for people that cannot work. And I also remember a situation that we faced that occurred in the virtual social forum, and we denounced, we complained about the feminicide that happened in Paraguay, which there were 2 girls that were assassinated by the army of Paraguay in 2020. And besides that, the mother of one of them is in prison, in the military prison. And so we had a mobilization, Latin American mobilization, so that she could go to a common prison, not only a man or a managed or military prison. One of the sisters of the one of the assassinated girls has a sister, and she has vanished. She has disappeared since last year. And there are a lot of things that got more severe. I live in Guadalajara, in Mexico, and every day we see women being violated, that are assassinated and kidnapped. Girls that are kidnapped. There is a structure of pandemics that gives us the courage, but also anger to continue. And we also see in Chile women that travel alone. And actually, I saw a model, for example, even a woman that travels alone, for example, is assassinated, suffers violence. And in Argentina as well, we have attacks. For example, in Guadalajara, one of those days, a trans person, someone threw acid on her face. And these are things that we face every day. So what are we doing to be opposed to that? We are meeting virtually. We are taking advantage of this means to talk about our pains, to have workshops, to hug ourselves, and also generate strategies, concrete strategies to accompany women that report these situations. And one of our colleagues in Argentina said, we don't have any water to wash our hands. We live in a peripheral neighborhood, and she passed away because she got COVID and she couldn't survive. I am a victim of COVID as well, and I actually cannot breathe as well as before. But the economical situations we live in our territories are very severe. There is a lot of inequality and injustice. And what we are doing about this possibility to meet, we are celebrating this feminist period we are in now. And we are trying to prepare an assembly, a meeting in Mexico, and also a political agenda. We believe that we have to go from just complaining to actually organize something in the territories. In Mexico, we are working on our 3rd meeting of Latin American women, and we are now seeing broadcasts. We are watching broadcasts made in the social media, and then we can share about share this experience. And something that we did, just to remember last year, a colleague from Brazil, the Amazon, she said, let's have a meeting to celebrate the African descendant Latin American women. There is this. We had a meeting of one week, and actually women that normally do not have voices are defending their territories in the Caribbean, Mexico, and in Latin America. And there's this perspective to struggle to have our voices be heard. And we have meetings to talk about how our history is made. We are here, and we have some experiences in the economics. And to close up, I guess I say that we should build another narrative and to face this pandemics of patriarchy. This is what we need to do to become sisters and face it, because it's not fair, and we cannot allow people to continue assassinating us and violating us as we are just something. Thank you, Rosie, for being on time. Let's summon also Ingrid of Argentina, from Argentina. Let's continue our trip to Latin America. Good afternoon. Ingrid. She is part of the movement Not One Less. She's a journalist and a writer, and she has a podcast, a radio transmission actually, and she's going to speak in Spanish. Okay, so thank you. You have 10 minutes as well. Okay, good afternoon. Or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for this room, for this opportunity. Thank you, Rosie, for talking about the Latin American scenario. I'm going to talk about Argentina and in relation to it. And this has been going on in many places in the world. From the 200, we've had 279 feminicides since the beginning of lockdown. We know by civil society that there are a lot of information that we do not have, and the consequences of the isolation of women in their homes with the abusers is going to bring us other kinds of news. Now we are seeing the consequences of pandemics on women's bodies. In 2015, when there was a popular mobilization, we had 250 feminicides in Argentina. We had not lowered the number of feminicides in Argentina. 2019, we had it was a key year in Argentina. There was a movement in which we had a key aspect to that movement. The people of sexual diversity and women got together in the last 5 years until we had the pandemics. It was the social movement that grew the most regarding the meaning and mobilization on the streets. We had a strike in 2016, and the first strike we had before strikes against the government in the previous year. We mobilized a lot of people asking for the legalization of abortion in Argentina. Today, after the pandemics, after having the legalization of abortion in Argentina, we've had other other conquests, important conquests that didn't appear in the government 1.5 years ago. Well, nowadays, actually, we have a worse situation. The gender agenda is actually now absent. And we also have an increase in the political violence against women, especially in social media. And in the traditional parties, the right wing are linked to the anti-feminism and anti-gender. The crisis, because of the pandemics, is an economical crisis and a crisis on the management of the government. It has increased the inequalities. Women and young people are the most affected, and they actually take longer to recover economically. There is a report that says that there was a retrocess on the work scenario related to women in Latin America. Women in Argentina lost 1,600,000 positions in the labor market. Women are paid less. There is actually a bigger difference regarding young people. We are four times less able to recover in relation to men, and we increased the amount of services that are not paid because they are made at home, they're domestic. In Argentina, before the pandemics, in 2020, we've had one in 10 women in charge of kids left the labor market. In Argentina, the ones that were the most affected by the sanitary crisis are the mothers of small kids. They are the ones that suffer the most. The men actually recovered 200,000 positions in work positions more than women. They say that the less work positions, job positions we lose, most of the conditions, the lesser levels of work. We're talking about informal labor and people that have less income. In Argentina, the domestic work made by women are sub-registered, they are informal, and they are the ones that lost with these pandemics the most. And I'm talking about these economical data because we know that without economical autonomy, there is no stability. The structural instability is the one that builds the man pyramid. We are in retrocess. The pandemic has disarticulated us. Our strong point is not virtual mobilization. It is mobilization on the streets. We have to hold our hands. And in the pandemics, this was disastrous for us women. We lost a lot of power. And this is the point that we are beginning to articulate again. You're starting to get together again. There is a feminism movement of workers of the land. Also, the politicians, women politicians, we are actually getting together again, and the communicators, and this was very important for the organization, and also for the battle of legalization of abortion in Argentina. We are trying to rethink strategies. It's time for us to go back, to rethink strategies, to go back to the streets. We have to think about the agenda of caring, and we cannot get together in the women's meeting, which last year it was made online, but it's not the same for us. We hope that next year we can do this live. The conclusion is that in Argentina, we have to take on the streets again to generate and go back to have an agenda so that the opinion of women is on the public agenda. We know this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ingrid. And I hope that you can do it soon. And I wish this for you and to Argentina as well.
Nora, tu micrófono se cerró.
Nora, your microphone is closed. Okay, now can you listen?
Abbiamo sentito, Nora. Nora, non ti
ora
abbiamo
chiamo
sentito.
Ada.
We couldn't listen. We can't listen to you, Nora. We're not able to.
Non ti abbiamo sentito,
Allora
Nora.
chiamo Ada Donno della Casa delle Donne del Lecce.
Yeah, we're not listening to you. Now I'm going to send from Donna Lecce house. Ada Dono. Just a second. I'm going to decrease amplification. The amplification. We are actually gathered in Lecce, in the house of Lecce. So I have a greeting on behalf of the women of this house. I would like to express my pleasure to be connected to you from the south of Italy, closer to the heart of the Mediterranean. So thank you all that are connected here, all of the communicators that could organize the seminar with these systems. Your care. This is a word, and if you listen, if you take a closer attention, they got into the political agenda. There is no political actor that doesn't talk about this. It was announced that care is going to be the main point of the next 10 years, United Nations. And this is very positive, evidently. We can actually think that it is a conquest of our own. But we would like to emphasize the risk of an abuse of this word, because before it becomes an abused word, we have to define it. As women, we have to fulfill it with efficient strategies. And we women that are subject of care and that can be transformed into a policy of care. So our challenge is to propose this as a transformation of reality, an alternative paradigm to the dominant, as a lot of the speakers said. The paradigm inside, we can talk about the rights and liberty of women, but not only of women. In 10 minutes, evidently, it is difficult to say everything I wanted to say, so I'm going to leave a lot of aspects on the side. I'm going to concentrate on other 3 points proposed by Alessandra on her presentation, concepts which we discussed among us before actually the preparation of this seminar. The first one is the danger of the instrumental use of pandemics, of the social disturbances caused by the pandemics that emphasize the pre-existent problems caused by the governments. There is an instrumental use by the government to use the economical and political aspects and to produce a retrocess on our rights. This was said by some of our reporters. It's been 1 year, 1.5 years that we have denounced this, that we have complained about this as Italian women. And we had a campaign to talk about this. And the next generation in the European plan, we believe is a sham, the scam. The transition plan of ecological and for gender equality, it is actually preventing the practical problems. It is for a paradigm to conserve patriarchal and imperialist concepts that dominated the world until this present moment. On the document, let's go back a little. On the document of the Democratic Union of Women from 2020, we emphasized the danger that was externalized by this document. There is this danger that these emergent reports, we are going to actually not talk only about Italy, but this is an important danger, using the sanitary emergency to make a constraint on social protests. This is something that has the risk to become a reality. On the other hand, there is not the instrumental use by neo-Nazis and fascists wings. They do not. We cannot say that there is a concrete perspective of return, but this fascist movement may actually have a retrocess on our rights. And I would like to emphasize the revenge of militarism and this return of capitalism to get out of the traditional crisis, economical crisis. This is actually a new proposition to a new political scenario. We have seen this in history. One part dominating the other. These are not simply ghosts. This is a construction that we have seen on the nations, which is contrary to what women in the world and in any latitude declared, and which was renounced, to which it was renounced. The essential element of description of this paradigm of cure and care is to destroy this patriarchal triangle of militarism, elaborating the concept of non-militarized presence. That's why I believe we can say that here we have all things that should be thrown out, and this should be said facing the UN. we shouldn't have fundaments of supremacy, but we should have collaboration, cooperation paradigms. There was our colleague that was talking about vaccines, and this is important when we talk about care, and we have to take care of the environment. We have values that correspond to this change that we are talking about, and this is being confronted by what is prevalent and dominant. So we have to be able to express this conflict, and that's why we have these meetings, and they are very important. I believe that we should make these meetings more dense. So we have to have this passion of women, this force of women to guide this conflict and orient them. Only like this, I believe, we are going to be able to say that nothing will be like before. This was what was said before. Nothing is going to be like before. It was said in the beginning of the pandemic. So we should take it as a real desire. Thank you very much.
Volevi intervenire te adesso? Sì.
Sì, come abbiamo stabilito, Nora, dunque...
You'd like to have your intervention now? Now we have all the presentations, the rapporteur. Thank you for the speakers, the organizers, for the density, the suggestions, the analysis, the proposals that were shared in the first session. You'll be very rich. You'll be like a treasure to build up relationships and documents. So you're going to have some minutes available to have questions and answers, comments. People who are present, I think that you have an intervention that it was requested. Monica, the sister, right, that is present in Rome. So if you agree, Monica, we will speak up right now, and if you have questions, answers, comments, you have 20, 30 minutes, to have the interpreters that are doing a wonderful job and should be recognized. So Monica, the seat, and then you have comments, questions that could come from Zoom and Facebook. Hi, Nicolette. Welcome. Thank you for this journey. Incredible, amazing. I have been listening to you all. It's quite a strong impact when you think about emotions, knowledge, and the policy, because you are together. We are in the with this feeling of belonging. We are prepared. We are not prepared before. So where you have this intercontinental dialogue, it's incredible. So it's clear and it is confirmed. It's shown this reading of gender that you shared throughout these months in Italy, in this experience that you are having, the society of caring. It helps us to build up this critical thinking that is necessary to overcome this phase better than when you started. Because in the global leadership, objectively, we are facing chauvinism, patriarchalism, so strong when you have a decision making by men that are in the leadership, men that want to have this agenda of power, superpower. nations, but we are talking about interrelations approach. So it's a like of a biblical patriarchalism. It's not something that comes from the industrial era. It seems that you are going back to the patriarchalism where the woman were murdered. So you had all this sacrifice, all these issues relate to reproductions, or our voices were canceled, silent. You were resigned or silenced. So we got to this effort, this organizational dialogue. I am really touched by that. And I have this sense of responsibility. So someone asked me to share with you what is being done by the Society of Caring. We have participated in the Society of Cura, healing. And you talked about that, about our agenda, our sisters that are facing these difficulties. But these historical moments that you are having in Italy, the final of G20 that had the participation of Italy, that had to conduct the 20 big companies of the land and guide them to go out of this pandemic. And this was our agenda. Remember, the words are so important to have the sanitary response towards pandemic, so you would be ready to face pandemics, future pandemics, and the sustainability, gender, and the fight against inequalities, social inequality. So it was in the discussion of public policies. But if I have to say about the conference that you had yesterday with the government to prepare this meeting that you are going to have in the 30th and 31st of October after the Italian presidency, if you had to have a sentence, icon, business is an illusion. We have to be ready. You have to face our other pandemics, and all this situation you repeat because the unbalanced situation of the human conditions and the natural situation, the current situation is unrecoverable. So you have to build financial tools, but they are doing this not with responsibility, but with the alliance of world banks out of the United Nations, out of democratic points where you have these international conventions. And it is within the United Nations. And we have this inequality. It is growing. We don't have any balance. And this is the fact. It means technological solutions, not a redistribution. The fact that you have more money, no more social interests. So this is a way to go that it's contrary to what you have explained that would be the coalition of women. We have 3 days of mobilization in Rome, and you have, of course, sanitary measures, even though you have the national security system that is not in alliance with us, even though we are facing these situations. You are going to block the city that is related to the business center, and you are going to have areas that we are considering red areas where you have the hotels where the delegations are, and you are being there representing saying that the tourism is important for having the economic back, with this same idea of good relationship that we always had in our cities. We are going to have 3 days of mobilization, and we are going to have a demonstration, then an assembly, a national assembly open to different types of contributions. And this is the pride that I can share with you. I'd like to share with my comrades, women comrades as well, where we are here as a key point, politically addressing this coalition, not only being led by patriarchal structures, but we have youth with us. You have the labor parts with us, the workers with us. You know, all these instances, the productive sectors that were organized during pandemic. So, you know, they have to respect the right of people and respect the standards of management, of solid waste, you know, sustainability practices, and social rights. They should not be worked out the way that it was before. You know, the workers of these plants especially had a protagonism in this initiative. And with this operation of relationships, of spaces, and you have this horizontal dialogue that is not a vertical, you know, it's a collective intelligence that is horizontalized and participative. And you'll be there tomorrow, going for this moment. This moment now is important. They wanted to divide us, but you are united. When they wanted to individualize us, spread out, we are in cohesion, you know, because they have fear, because they have ignorance, whatever. On the contrary, we have the message that we are together, you are unit, and the women will take on this democracy, this horizontal approach, this transparent approach. It's not that easy, we know, but it will be our firm position where you're going to work with our dignity and our responsibility, and as a message of this work, as a testimony of this fact that I am sharing with you, as a positive outcome, where you should viralize this environment of unit, thanks to the protagonism of women, youth, that could have the voice heard. We are exchanging idea in the assemblies, and you should be out of this pandemic together. Instead of divided, you have to be united. We have to become visible, even though they wanted to make us invisible. We have our way to go. We have to carry on together. You have to have a political surveillance as well. You have to have all the institutions that support us together, and you can have internal and external mechanisms with a direct and reliable relationship, and you can have a stronger relationship and compliance and a capacity of strongly get together with our shared choices. At the end of the day, this G20 will be bullshit, you know. They were not going to take the decisions that should be done in the 90s. they are really wrong in a temporal space. They are out of the space, I would say. So women, we have to show alternatives where you can have a circle. It's not a front, but a circle around us, with us in our country, so you can have our voices, our proposals heard in the center of decision making. Otherwise, you cannot grow. So this is my invitation. Let's get together. Let's participate as maximum as possible. You know, you have the events here, G20 here in Italy, so you should be together. If you are not present, you should participate. Let's get united more and more from now on. This is a very good experience that Nicoletta, Alessandra, and other women created this meeting and allowed us. So we are going to get stronger. We are going to have now autumn and winter time in Europe, and you have to resist. Thank you very much. Thank you, Monica, for your words. These are very strong, very powerful. Are very powerful. So we have this energy, a good energy, you know, intensively. That not the energy that the capitalism submit us. You don't have questions? You don't have written questions? No? Face-to-face, whatever. So we have a photo now, right? So we are finishing the lectures, and this Monica's input is the wrap-up. So Alessandra, you can now have the final words, and I must say that in my point of view, it was so beautiful to hear you all, you know, the women of the planet together. So you have this maternal symbolic relationship. It's difficult, but you have such a willing to struggle, such a strength, and this is so precious that I have this with me. Thank you, Alessandra. So I'd like to say something, Nicoletta. I support everything that you said. Thank you very, very much. Because we have hope and the willing to struggle, to keep fighting. Alessandra, so let's have the final words beautifully. Hi, Alessandra. You are here? Yeah, please, audio, we cannot hear you. Please open your mic and it's muted. Besides, thank you, people who are here. Thank you, the interpreters, the translators, men and women, that in all difficulties that you have with the connections, they could make us to communicate, to understand each other. At least here, no problem. I think in all planets that were with us. And they are here more time than it was supposed to. So this is my final words to share what you said. Your words are my words. And in the beginning we're kind of words, so I would just like to say thank you, interpreters. We are going to see each other again. And tomorrow we'll be together at the same time in Italian time, at 2 p.m. in Italian. And you hope to be together, and you are going to have other participants, and it will be a day with very interesting interventions from different countries. Thank you. See you tomorrow. Thank you.